Good evening. I'm David Brown. I'm the manager of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience here at UCLA's Herb Alpert School of Music. It's my pleasure, along with our co-sponsor, our Department of Musicology, to welcome you to tonight's program. I have a couple of housekeeping announcements to let you know. First of all, we have a really fantastic season that we're just starting off right now. And in fact, we have our next program is going to be just in 1 week. We have a performance by the Golden Thread Ensemble, which will be featuring Grammy Award winner Lauren Sklamberg, a name you might recognize from the Klezmatics. So we have so many wonderful things coming up. And in order to know about those things, I want to strongly encourage you, if you're not already, to make sure to join our email list. I suspect that many of you already are there, and that's how you knew about this. Another thing, though, I want to let you know, which you might not know about, is to make sure to also find us on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. And I'll give you just one extra good reason why. We have this wonderful program tonight, and it will include some performance by my colleague, Neal Stulberg, who I think is right there, he is. And if you find us on social media and you scroll back a few posts ago, you'll get to hear him talk about a party game that he played with Leonard Bernstein and almost won. Leonard Bernstein invented the game, so it's not 100% fair. But if you go to Instagram or Facebook, you just look for us, it's UCLA Jewish Music. In fact, if you want to take a moment to do that right now, I won't object, because while you have your phones out, you can make sure they're on silent for our program tonight. Again, if you want to follow us, that's at UCLA Jewish Music. I also want to thank the Nazarian Center for Israel Studies for helping us in getting the word out about this event tonight. And I also want to let you know that afterward we'll have a small reception. You're welcome to meet our artists and ask questions, and that will be in room 1345. When you exit, we'll have some folks here, possibly, most likely also including me, directing you where to find that. It's just a couple of rooms down. So our guest tonight is Malcolm Miller. Malcolm Miller is a musicologist and pianist, honorary associate and associate lecturer at the Open University in the UK, and editor of Arietta, Journal of the Beethoven Piano Society of Europe. He has published widely on Beethoven, Wagner, and contemporary music, including a monograph, Boundaries, Space, and Register in Beethoven's Piano Music, and as editor of the volume of essays, Classical and Popular Music in Israel, which I believe you're going to hear more about in just a moment. So please join me in welcoming our guest, Malcolm Miller.
Thank you, David, very much for that very nice introduction and laying out it's a great honor to be at the series that you've announced, all these wonderful highlights you're about to enjoy in the next coming weeks. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I wanted to thank David and also Professor Mark Kligman of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience, and also to William Kinderman of the Department of Musicology for inviting me to UCLA for this remarkable week. I would also like to announce that I'm very pleased to be here because I actually seen for the first time within the last hour the actual book which we are launching, which I've got a picture of here. And this event is by way of a book launch. The publication date is in fact the 18th of November, so this is a special peak before publication. And the book is entitled, as you see, Classical and Popular Music in Israel. And I am but the editor and a contributor, but I'd like to thank my fellow contributors who really are the ones that have made this book, which what I hope you will agree is actually a very wonderful volume full of wonderful, fresh and up-to-date research on this topic. I'd also like to thank officially the publishers who are University of Rochester Press and those part of Boydell, and particularly the series editor of the Eastman Studies of Music, Professor Ralph Locke, who has overseen an amazing achievement of over 200 titles in this series, which he actually founded not too many years ago. And that's an amazing, remarkable achievement. So a few words about the book, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Israeli music. And then I'm happy to open the floor to questions or discussion. We're then going to be joined by wonderful performers, Iris Malkin, singer, and Neal Stulberg, who's going to be performing on the piano, and they're going to be doing, amongst other things, of the program, joining me after this tiny break, including a USA premiere of some songs which are actually discussed in the book, in one of the chapters of the book. So that should be something to look forward to very soon. So this book addresses the global significance of music by composers in Israel, exploring the confluence and contrasts of disparate traditions that make up Israel's rich and varied cultural tapestry, which throughout its history, checkered with periods of conflict as well as calm, and music by Israeli composers in a wide variety of genres and styles has attained a remarkably dynamic and thriving impetus despite, and perhaps because of, the harsh realities of everyday life. And being aware of the publication date of this book, and as you know, books take a long while to get published, it seems that this moment has coincided with perhaps a glimmer of hope in the overall realities of daily life in the region, and one's thoughts are to all the people there and those who've suffered, and we're very aware of that. So we hope that an understanding of the cultural forces in the region and the beauty that music can bring will actually make its own contribution to that reality. So one word that I have to say at the beginning is that we've dedicated the book to two wonderful scholars, Amnon Shiloach and Yehoash Hershberg, who were involved in the original inspiration for the book, which was a London University-based conference some years ago. And they were keynote speakers, and sadly are not with us anymore to see the publication of the book, but were very much aware of its progress and wanting to see it come to fruition. And their students, many of the students are and colleagues are featured amongst the contributors. The essays in the book touch on a cross-section of issues relevant to the field of music, but also to musicology in a broader sense: history, interpretation, performance, and reception. They offer an insight into a repertory and a musical culture that is increasingly taking its place in a wider arena of contemporary music in a global sense. Amongst the topics covered are issues of transculturalism, obviously, dialogues and contrasts between East and West, Arab and Jewish traditions, regional and wider international trends, and contemporary and world musics, as well as the boundary between popular and classical musical studies, ethnographical, interview-based research, and even autoethnography. In one of the sections of the book is entirely to do with composers' own perspectives on their music and the music of their colleagues. I hope that overall the book will begin to raise the question, what might be the distinctive elements that color the pluralistic range of Israeli musical styles? And I'd suggest that an answer of that might lie within these pages in the investigation of the things that I've just mentioned, the regional and global tendencies, which express shifting patterns of Israeliness, an amalgam of identities, East and West, past and present, Hebrewism, Jewishness, and in certain cases, Arabness. So the context in which this book is published is a growing list of musical studies on Israeli music. In 2018, Oxford University Press launched the Oxford Bibliographies entry devoted entirely to Israeli art music by Ronit Setter, who's one of the authors of the book. And the Oxford Handbook to Jewish Studies, which has come out very recently, includes Israeli music within its chapters. A history of monographs that extends back to Yehezkel Hirschberg's groundbreaking biography of Paul Ben-Haim, and several books by Philip Bollman on the musical ideologies of the Yishuv, in other words, the settlement in the British Mandate Palestine, which had a very active musical life. And recently, these have been augmented by a trilogy of books by the musicologist Asaf Sheleg, the final volume of which has very, very recently appeared, called The State of Afterness, Contemporary Music in and About Israel. And Asaf Sheleg strikingly characterizes the evolution of Israeli music as a journey from territorial nationalism of the 1930s and 40s through to a rediscovery of diasporic sources and cultures in the 60s and 70s towards a more transcendent and international expression that reaches beyond political borders from the 1990s onwards. And this sort of large view of the subject is something which this book complements to a certain extent by going into micro-histories and detailed studies of aspects of Israeli music which have not been covered perhaps enough or emphasized enough. So I'm just going to very quickly see if this works. Quick illustration of the contents before I get into the detail. And we start with, there are 5 parts to the book. The first part is actually an overview by Michael Volpe of contemporary musical scene in Israel, which is very up to date in the sense that he reflects on the post-October the 7th situation at the end. And there's a lot of interesting detail. We then have what were the 3 keynote lectures of the original conference. And the person I haven't mentioned is Professor Arnold Whittle. So setting against the idea of Easternness in Israeli music and moving from Orientalism through to more recent expressions of ethnicity by Yehezkel Hirschberg, Amnon Shilar's exploration of the same idea of Eastern identities is then balanced by Arnold Whittle's view of the modernist Western tradition as it may relate to contemporary Israeli music, and that particularly of Schoenberg's relationship with Israel and his particular work that he wrote for the State of Israel for a collection in 1949, Dreimal Tausend Jahre, which is a choral setting in a dodecaphonic style. So part 3 then introduces individual composers and individual works, as well as groups of composers who are looking at particular themes. For example, the Holocaust in music, for example, memory and bereavement in music, and my particular chapter, which is on the use of Middle Eastern instruments by Israeli composers in their ensemble, in their concert music. The popular part of the book, of the title, is part 4, and this is a fascinating group of studies which sort of cover broadly some very different aspects of popular music. The first one is a look at cabaret in Israel as a cultural transfer from the cabaret of Vienna, Berlin, Paris, and how it expressed itself in the theaters of Tel Aviv in the 30s and 40s and even 50s, and presumably is the sort of background to satire and comedy as it might express itself in more recent years. We then get to a wonderful example of the cultural transformation of song. And in At Adama is a song with the author is tracing the evolution of that song in different guises from the original songs of the land of Israel folk background to modern jazz and even Middle Eastern transformations. And then there's an article on progressive rock, of course, comparing Israeli and British rock. And finally, in this section, we end with a soundscape of Israel after October the 7th. And the reason that this comes in the popular music is that there's a very extensive survey of the reception history of radio and broadcasts and other forms of internet music as it was affected by the events of that time. But also, it's a more universal type of study of the response that societies have to certain sound marks, particularly sirens. So we then move into the final section, which are the composers' perspectives. And amongst the composers are going to be Oded Zehavi, whose songs we'll hear later on, and a very interesting ethnographic study by Emad Dalal, who is a oud player and conductor and teacher, and who did a very fascinating study of Arabic musical styles and compositions within Israel, looking at whether there's a particular identity that differentiates Arabic performance in Israel from Arabic composition in other countries. So this was a very quick view of the book, and I think we should actually have some music. I just, by way of introduction, mentioned that the keynote by Yehezkel Braun, what happened here? Outlines 4 points about Israeli music that represent what he calls the vision of the East. And the first of that is European Orientalism. Some of you will be aware of what that entails, the view of the East through the lens of the West, basically, which was very common at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Citations and allusions to Eastern Jewish ethnic communities, particularly as a result of ethnographic work at the beginning of the 20th century, when these ethnic communities within Judaism were transcribed and recorded, and we have sort of collections such as Edelson's wonderful Thesaurus from the 20s and 30s that composers made use of. The negation of Western tonal harmony and counterpoint, a very important aspect of Israeli style, particularly from the beginning of the state or even before in the 40s. And finally, imitation of Arabic musical instruments, which is what I'm going to talk about now. So let's listen to some music. That piece of music was a work for piano trio with Persian santur entitled Psalterion by the Israeli composer Yehezkel Braun. It offers a fascinating and fantastic blurring of identities in which the Western piano trio, which we're used to here in the concert hall, takes on the characteristics of its Eastern partner, the Persian santur, which whilst the work also combines Arabic modes alongside European harmonies and form. The title, Psalterion, alludes to the psanterin mentioned in the list of instruments in the book of Daniel, a Greek word which refers to a type of lyre played with mallets and which corresponds closely with the modern santur. Braun's interest in this instrument stems primarily from varied musical influences he absorbed in Israel after emigrating at the age of 2 in 1924 with his family from his native Germany, and also from his teachers, including Boscovich, one of the early pioneer composers, who, as mentioned above, who was particularly interested in evoking sounds of the Middle East. Braun studied for several years with Dom Jean Clair at Solesmes in France, becoming an authority on Gregorian chant, and the twin influences of Middle Eastern and medieval chant color his melodic and harmonic style. Although he composed 4 regular piano trios, the trio with Santur represented a new departure. As he himself said, and I'm quoting, "Oriental and Western music are worlds apart, so different that it is well nigh impossible to combine them. For me as a composer, this was undoubtedly the most difficult task I've ever tried to tackle." The melodic material of this piece is drawn directly from Braun's transcriptions of performances by his friend, the amateur santur player and Persian carpet dealer, Eli Sassoon. These transcriptions were then integrated with the piano trio without changing their basic form. And both the first and third movements use the Persian makam dashti, similar to the makam bayat, one of the most popular and important modes of Arabic folk music, used widely in Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and Iraq. Both these outer movements begin with a slow and free solo santur soliloquy, which leads into a more rhythmic movement for the ensemble. The range of sonorities is refreshing. Rather than westernizing the santur, the result is an orientalizing or easternizing of the piano trio, with much use of high registral cello, doubling melodies for the strings, and repeated note textures, ornamentation, and pedal points. The accent is on the imitation of the santur by the trio. And again, to quote the composer, he says, quote, "At times I let the trio speak Persian, and at times I rather let them represent a Western ear, that, qua Western, meditates upon Eastern music." It is this problematizing of the encounter of East and West, the curious blend of identities, a dialogue, one might say, between cultures which contrast, which forms the core of my researches into Israeli concert music in recent years. And it is this theme which more or less colors the volume as a whole, the effect, the Easternness of Israeli music, one might say. While in some sense transculturalism has a global significance, it also has a distinctive history in the aesthetics of Israeli music ever since the beginnings. The beginnings being at the beginning of the Yeshuv, the settlement, the British Mandate Palestine, at the beginning of the 20th century. But the beginnings of Israeli music, as we tend to think of it, is the influx of émigré Jewish musicians who escaped Nazi persecution in Europe 2 decades later, some 40 composers amongst them in the 1930s and 40s, who helped to foster composition and create key institutions. These included the Palestine Broadcasting Service, modeled on the BBC, for example, and the Palestine Orchestra, which famously Toscanini first conducted in 1936, which was renamed the Israel Philharmonic in 1948. And the immigrant composers encountered new Middle Eastern sound worlds. Many aimed to evoke these sounds and helped particularly by contact with musicians such as the Yemenite singer Bracha Sfira and the Iraqi Udist Ezra Aharon, who was actually featured in the very first broadcasts of Palestine Broadcasting Service. So we have very many examples of this type of mediation of East and West, the Orientalism of that early period, by composers such as Paul Ben-Haim, who emigrated from Munich, was a famous, was a promising composer and conductor. Alexander Urea Boscovich, who I've mentioned as being one of the teachers of Yehezkel Braun, who came from Romania. Erdon Partos from Hungary, who was a viola player and composed a lot for the instrument, as well as a lot of chamber music. And Mordecai Ze'ira, who is just one of many other composers. All of these composers aimed to somehow evoke the sound of the Middle East. Rather than using Arabic and Middle Eastern instruments, they did attempt to imitate them, whether it was the repeated note, plucked sounds of the oud, or the gentle woodwind tones of the ney, or the vibrant sounds of various percussion instruments. However, they didn't use those instruments. Just as an example of an imitation of rather than use of the instruments, I have two works by Paul Ben-Haim. So the first is going to be the theme from his Variations on Hebrew Melody, which is presented in a sort of Middle Eastern non-harmonic way at the beginning of what becomes then a very westernized theme and variations. And in this very initial statement of the theme, we get a very flute-like sound, which is unusual in its use of the sort of type of glissando on the strings. And the second example is imitation of the oud in a toccata of 5 pieces for piano of 1943. The variations are from 1939, so these are pre-State of Israel. This is early Ben-Haim. Obviously that these are idiomatic pieces for their instruments in a certain sense, but there is this attempt to bridge the type of cultural gap there. So for Ben-Haim and Boscovich's students and composers born in Israel much later in the 1950s to 70s, the issue was no longer how to do this attempt at type of Middle Eastern style, but rather how to express their own identity through the various multicultural influences already around them. The non-immigrant composers. They had benefited from the work of both these pioneer generations and by a group of composers born in Israel or who came as very young children, such as Yehezkel Braun, who deepened their understanding of regional Jewish and Middle Eastern ethnographic musical sources, including cantillation modes, Arabic maqam, and other aspects of Middle Eastern music. Also, they were influenced by the post-war avant-garde and electronic musics, For these younger composers, the Middle Eastern soundscape, including the sound of Arabic instruments, was not viewed as exotic and outside their own style, but as natural. As Oded Zehavi, who was born in 1961 and whose song cycle we're going to hear later on, has commented in an interview, "I am a native of Jerusalem, and acoustically, the air of the city is full of sounds for me, Oriental sounds, the sounds from the Sephardic synagogues, Eastern European music. They're not exotic, they're not to be cited and analyzed as sources, they're part of my very being." Within that context, the use of regional instruments, especially the oud, rich in cultural symbolism, forms a potent piece of the jigsaw of composers' sound habitats, as reflected in, for example, Menachem Wiesenberg, another composer of the young generation of Oded Zehavi, who commented that, quote, "As an Israeli composer who lives in Israel and is surrounded by the sounds of Arabic music, I felt it's only natural for me to use the instrument that symbolizes, in a way, this wonderful tradition." One of the developments of the late 1980s and 1990s was the formation of the Department of Eastern Music of the Jerusalem Academy of Music and Dance, instigated by the late Professor Dalia Cohen, and who appointed the virtuoso Udist composer and conductor Taisir Elias as its director. Composers such as Menachem Wiesenberg and the current head of conducting in the Jerusalem Academy, Michael Volper, a contributor to this volume, were inspired by Taisir Elias and others to compose for ensembles including Arabic instruments, including the oud. His role might be compared to that of Bracha Svira, the singer who inspired the composers of the earlier period of Israeli music. As Wiesenbach recalled, quote, "I was very lucky to find Taisir Elias, who was a wonderful musician and became a very close friend of mine. He really introduced me to the Arabic art music and was indispensable in helping me understand the possibilities and playing technique of the oud. His contribution to my music written for the oud is crucial." What is common to Wiesenberg's works incorporating the oud is the adaptation of elements of both Middle Eastern and Western traditions within a new symbiosis. In his Trio Lamento of 1996, the identities of the Arabic oud and the European piano shift, cross-fertilize with each other, and interact with reciprocity. It is a highly charged piece which was written in memoriam of the former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, assassinated in 1995. A similar symbiotic reversal of roles occurs in Wiesenberg's other works for oud, including a concerto. So I want to hear a little bit of this extract to show the free improvisation of the oud taken up by the keyboard, and then the virtuoso ending in a sort of Arabic style of unison for the whole entire orchestra. This is from the concerto from 1994. As you can see, the interactions that we're going to go into that, and in fact, Taisir Elias, who this was written for, has engaged with with many composers and in this type of interaction since that piece was written, which is now quite a long time ago. In the interest of time, I'm just going to sort of summarize the main points here. So other composers, such as Michael Volpe, have also written oud pieces, a trio with oud, and also a concerto. Even the next generation of young composers, including a wonderful guy called Ronen Shapira, who imaginally called his concerto the Taksim-certo, based on a taksim, which is the sort of improvisatory section of an Arabic form. The instrument being the Middle Eastern tuned piano with a Western piano. And he invented a type of quarter-tone instrument. And Yitzhak Yedid is a pianist-composer whose style straddles the worlds of jazz, world music, and contemporary classical. And amongst his works are a jazz trio for bass, piano, and oud, for example, mixing Christian, Muslim, and Jewish traditions within progressive ethnic jazz and allusions to the Egyptian diva Kulthum. To what extent are such explorations of timbral fusions ideological? Baron and Rubin, in their Music in Jewish History and Culture, have defined the composer's motivations as both musical, the sheer appeal of the sound of the oud, for example, and secondly, ideological, a belief in the virtue of coexistence and dialogue. And several of the composers I've interviewed remarked on both of these things. So we have Menachem Wiesenberg, who said that as a composer, I always look for new and stimulating sounds to incorporate in my music. And at the same time, he sees that this piece is another humble effort of mine to try and bridge the gap between cultures and nations. As musicologist Benjamin Brinner has observed in his book, Playing Across the Divide, such ensembles, quote, provide a model of how one might live together, not only in peace, but in mutually beneficial harmony. The attitude is echoed in an interview about the Arab Jewish Youth Orchestra, which was founded by Tarsir Elias, and which has been going for quite a while, who remarked, quote, when we work together and play together, you cannot hate each other, and we believe really that music can tear down walls of hatred and misunderstanding and problems. So, as well as offering a guiding vision, the works discussed here appear to their composers to represent significant stages in the process of dialogue and in the quest for peaceful coexistence. So I hope that, to sum up, this book, as well as creating a space for a fuller appreciation of classical and popular music in Israel, will also make some step towards the greater understanding across cultures. As I say at the end of my chapter, ethnographic materials, the sonic properties of the instruments, here traverse cultural borders and transcend national agendas, drawing on layered identities and cultures. In so doing, the music highlights the dialectical tension of regional and international influences, relevant as much to global aesthetic political tendencies as to the immediate intercultural discourse of Israel and the Middle East. And I hope that you will enjoy the music of the second half, which reflects the contents of the books. There will be music, as you can see on your program, by Yehezkel Braun. We heard the Psanterin, who was also a great vocal composer and choral composer. The music of Ben-Haim and Josef Tal to give a taste of the early generation of the immigrant generation of composers in the 1930s and 40s. The USA premiere of 3 of Oded Zehavi's works, songs, which in the book are described in terms of the composing at a time of war. They were composed in the last year. And finally, Menachem Wiesenberg, who we heard the oud pieces, who also wrote a wonderful collection of Shirei Eretz, Songs of the Land. So we'll have a short break, I think, now, while the stage is reset, and on with the music. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to do that as well, but if not, thank you very much for listening, and there is a 50% discount, which, as you can see, there's a lot of other music, which there's a code, if you make note of it. It's still valid for a month, I have to say that. What I didn't say was that I would like to actually acknowledge and thank the contributors to the volume. And it will take me 1 second to read all their names. Of course, Michael Volpe, who is a great inspiration. The 3 keynote speakers I'd mentioned, the late Johannes Hirschberg and Amnon Shiloach, and Professor Arnold Whittle, who just celebrated his 90th birthday. Josef Goldenberg, Irit Jungermann, Galia Ducin Arieli, Uri Gollomb, Julia Kreinin, Anat Rubinstein, Naama Ramot, Kalma Raz, Alan Shab, Tanya Serman, Rotem Luz, the daughter of Yehezkel Braun, Emma Dalal, Oded Zehavi, who I've mentioned, and Max Stern. And the afterword is written by Ronit Seter, a wonderful scholar of Israeli music. And thank you to all you for listening to this. And I hope if you do read it that you enjoy it. Thank you very much. There's a short break, I think, now. So, or if you would like to ask a question, that's also, I think. Yeah. This is actually the only copy I have, and even that was quite a rarity. But online, if you order it online, the shipping is free. So. Reorder the stage. So just I'd like to introduce our first item for the concert, which are the Songs of the Dove and the Lily, by Yehezkel Braun, the composer who was very well known in Israel, particularly for his choral and vocal works, and many kibbutz choirs regularly sang his music, and choirs all over the world, in fact, in America and in Britain particularly. These settings of Lea Goldberg's poems demonstrate his sort of love of melody. He was one of his musicological interests was the influence of temple chant on Gregorian plain chant. Both of us have had the privilege and delight of knowing him. He was a wonderful human being, and I knew him for many years from my musicological work. And Iris is going to tell you something about her acquaintance as well. And I hope you enjoy these songs. Thanks.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. When I was 12, I sang in a girls' choir in Israel, in Carmiel, and I got to meet Yehezkel Braun. He came to work with us. We sang a choral piece that he wrote, and then I also got to play a Chopin piece on the piano for him, and it was really lovely to meet him. Also, this piece is very meaningful to me. I sang it years ago for my graduation recital at the Jerusalem Academy of Music, and then got back to it years later, and now, thanks to Malcolm, I'm singing this again, so it's just really nice to visit this piece in different stages of my life, and I hope you enjoy it.
Mikts Hana Szenes, Magad, Vayoavach
The next three pieces are chosen to give a little bit of a taste of the music of Ben-Haim and Josef Tal, and also to step back, as it were, one generation from Yehezkel Braun before we step forward a generation to Oded Zehavi and Menachem Wiesenberg. The first piece is actually, if you remember that I played an example from the 5 pieces of 1943 with the toccata fifth movement, imitating the oud. The first piece is a modal piece showing another type of engagement with the East, and that is sort of the harmony moving away from Western harmony into something that was more regional and something that was interesting to Ben-Haim even when he was in Germany. He actually was sort of exploring that type of language before he arrived in 1933 in Palestine. So the first piece is titled Pastoral, and it has that lovely quality of sort of stillness and open biblical type of landscapes that was also explored by painters of the period, evoking a type of idyllic Orientalism of the East. The second piece is by Josef Tal, sort of illustrating the opposite in some sense. He was coming from the type of modernist tradition which he continued. Josef Tal also arrived in the 30s. In fact, he arrived in Palestine as a photographer. That was the visa which was allowed. They didn't want any more composers, obviously. But he was officially a photographer, but then regained his type of compositional voice while he was there in the kibbutz. And in the 1950, this was one of the first published Israeli piano sonatas. And the second movement is based on one of the Shirei Eretz, the sort of early phase of folk song, a tune called, title is Rachel, by, I think, Charette. I'm not sure who the composer was. But the tune is actually a very simple tune and is repeated many times in the bass as a type of ground bass type of thing that Purcell would do. And it's called an ostinato. And I think you'll hear it very clearly, this bass tune. as it's repeated. But each time it's repeated, there's an extra variation, and it builds up to a sort of intense expressionistic climax, and shows his aesthetic being sort of very different from the type of view of what Israeli music could be, which was what Ben-Haim was experimenting with. And then finally we come to the Basso Sephardic, which is probably one of the most popular and famous of Ben-Haim's folk song arrangements. It was originally a sort of song, and he made it into it was orchestrated and arranged for different groups. And this is a piano version by Ben-Haim himself without the words. And he would have picked up this tune possibly from Bracha Ze'ira, his work with her in the 1930s and 40s. And it was a Ladino song, and he transferred it, he set it as a Hebrew poem, and then orchestrated it and arranged it. So the three pieces by Ben-Haim and Tal.
So these are 3 songs from a much larger song cycle that Oded Zehavi wrote recently. And all of the songs, in fact, are available to be heard and seen on YouTube, if you're interested. He wrote these in 3 languages, some English, some Yiddish, and some Hebrew. And we are performing one song in each language. The first called Light in English, the second called Windmill, the windmill in Yiddish. And the last song we'll be performing is from 2 songs within this cycle, which are children's songs. And it's called Migrating Birds, and that is in Hebrew.
The night has 1,000 eyes.
group of songs is a trio of songs from the Shirei Eretz by Menachem Wiesenberg. These were arrangements that he made he used to, in the 80s, make song arrangements for famous singers in Israel. Chava Alverstein was one of them. And Mira Zakai was the singer for these songs. And in fact had more than that were published. And he made a sort of a second extension publication a few years later. So these 3 songs, I think, are, well, at least some of them you'll recognize, I hope. A very famous first one, Eli Eli. This was the song written as a poem by Hana Szenes, who was the resistance fighter dropped behind enemy lines in 1944 and captured by the Nazis, and unfortunately perished at that time. But she wrote this in 1942, these words, and they've become sort of very, very well known as a prayer. O Lord my God, I pray that these things never end, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of mankind. And of course you'll hear them in Hebrew, in the beautiful poetry that these words make. The second song is Laila Laila, a song which is often sung as a sort of lullaby. It's about the night. And the last one is the Hyacinth. So hope you enjoy this. Thank you.
Schei frach